Hello. I
Hey,
am
Matt.
here today with Jess Thibault, a partner at Higher Education, one of the leading recruiting and talent organizations in education. Jess, I could probably spend 4 or 5 minutes reading your LinkedIn page, but I'd rather hear directly from you. How do you think about your career? And less so the like specific jobs you've had and more the like narrative arc of your career and how you ended up where you are today.
Yeah, I love that. So thank you for having me. So nice to chat with you. Always fun. So when I look for a through line in my very complicated background and career journey, it's all about human potential. I've been just really, I think, obsessed with maximizing human potential from a very young age. I started volunteering in nonprofits as soon as I could and, kind of took it through there, went into the classroom, taught for over a decade,
Cool. What'd you
did my own
teach?
thing for a while, etc. I taught middle school science. I'm a
I
middle
love
school
that.
science. I'm a middle school teacher person. So big fan of the middle school years. I just think they're
Cool.
amazing.
And after teaching, where'd you go from there?
Oh, right. Yeah. So I left the classroom to go into marketing and communications, and I did that out of school for a while. And then 4 years ago, I came over to higher education. I had gotten an MBA and I wanted to pursue something different in the private sector. My entire life had been in nonprofits until that point, but I had always had that entrepreneurial bug. And so our founder, Mark Phillips, took a chance on me and came over here and have done everything in the business. I mean, when you're a small business, when you're a services firm in particular, everyone kind of just does everything. But at this point, I do all of our marketing and business development, client relations. I go to all the conferences, which is where I see you, and just kind of pay attention to what's happening in the industry, make sure that we're delivering on our search results and maintaining all of our thousands of relationships in the industry. So, yeah, it's fun.
Can we just spend a little bit of time on you've left the classroom, you're doing
Mhm.
marketing and communications,
Mhm.
and are you doing an MBA at night? Did you go full time? What was that? Just because like I think
Yeah.
there are a ton of teachers that have
Mhm.
been at a career crossroads for a while, right? And
Yeah.
some of that's COVID PTSD, some of that's,
Mhm.
just having been a teacher for 10, 20 years, like often hard to like tell them about a career path that somebody else has taken, right?
Mhm.
That's led to a successful business career.
Yeah, yeah, no, absolutely. I had my own business in 2011 for a couple of years and it kind of went nowhere, slash was a huge learning experience. It was a web app back in the day, totally different market now and everything.
Sure.
It was kind of around adult education and art education. So, I had kind of dipping my toes into entrepreneurial things. And I think that that helps when you're a teacher. On of your side gigs do matter, right? The ways that you've explored things outside the classroom do matter. I started my MBA. And yes, I was kind of laughing when you were asking the question because from 2017 to 2020 was a very insane 4 years of my life. Got an MBA, had two babies, moved out of the classroom, and was promoted twice into a director of Marcom at the private school where I worked. And then COVID hit, and I was like, okay, this is weird, this is different. And I finished my MBA and I was not, I don't know, the COVID world in education was hard. So I think that was another kind of impetus to move on. But yeah, no, I did an online program. I went through the Wisconsin University. They have an
Cool.
MBA consortium, which is four of the University of Wisconsin universities came together to build this online program. Highly recommend it. It was very good. And economical as well. So yeah, I just did it at night in between things. While nursing,
I I appreciate that. It's certainly not easy. And I think it's just helpful to like a lot of folks are like, well, I could go do that, but it's you don't always find somebody who's like, yeah, this was sort of the plan. So
Yeah, it was an intense period of time, but it paid off. And, I appreciate that experience though as well. I mean, I think those times of intense transformation can lead to something really beautiful.
and so tell me about higher education. I know it's been around for a while. I
Mhm.
know that it works with a lot of ed tech companies. I think it's sort of been evolving these past couple of years from what I understand. And maybe just give a little bit of an oral history because I think how you weave in is more fun if you understand the context of the company.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So our firm started in 2010. Our founder is Mark Phillips. He's been recruiting in this sector specifically for a couple decades. And I feel like general public doesn't always interface with headhunting firms and kind of understand the nuances of that. You know, there are kind of more big staffing firms or just kind of fast recruitment where, you know, you kind of just get a bunch of resumes or something. A lot of that's being replaced by tech. And then, of course, we have the Shreks, the really big executive retained firms in the world. But there's actually this entire ecosystem of headhunting firms that are right in the middle. And sometimes it's called professional search, sometimes it's called consultative search, because what we do is really in the middle there. We are highly consultative, so we are working with hiring managers often when they know they need something, they're not exactly sure what, or they need a lot of speed in a search, or it's confidential. And so we do work C-suite searches, but our primary focus is on this director, mid-level, vice president level searches. That's what we're most known for. It's what we do the most of. We do a lot within the sales organization, but I would say the overall theme of our candidate pool is that go to market. We have a really extensive network of people who either have experience with startups or high growth companies, like very fast growth, VC funded, that kind of stuff. A lot of sales, but marketing, product, like early product development, product marketing, all that kind of stuff. And then operations, finance, some directors of engineering. So that's the type of roles that we have. But as firms go across, this type of headhunting firm, we're fairly typical, but some headhunting firms focus on, say, they all do sales, or they just do tech, or they just do PE backed or VC. Then there's firms like us that double down on the sector. And education products and services specifically is the only sector that we work in. So paying attention to what's going on, using my own personal experience as an educator, I was always a really early adopter of ed tech. Huge fan of what it can accomplish for teachers in the way that they can really reach and optimize student learning. And so we bring all that together and really help all these different companies. We say ed tech most of the time, but we do work with a lot of clients that are not quite ed tech. They're tech-enabled services or managed services or nonprofits, R&D funds, right? There's a lot of people in and around education. We just don't tend to work for the schools themselves.
Yeah, I think EdTech is increasingly broadly defined. I was
Mhm.
just talking to Matt Kennard at Better Lesson about this
Yeah,
specific conundrum of like,
yeah,
the vast majority of like classic EdTech is actually becoming tech-enabled services.
yeah,
So I
absolutely.
think it's really hard not to be. I also think it's interesting, like you think about the evolution of the, like services firm and this like talent
Mhm.
function specifically, right? It's like trying to think through, you know, and I get this. We have the whiteboard job board, right? And a lot of people are
Mhm.
like, I don't know, I don't actually really have a problem with applicants. I have a million
100%.
applicants, but I don't know what to do with them. And so
Mhm.
the expertise to me feels less about like, can I deliver you 100,000 applicants to every job, and more, can I help you find a good candidate? And good is
Right.
obviously like super subjective. And so I
Mhm.
I would imagine that affects the way that that firm has to operate too. And I know because we've talked about it, like you've
Mhm.
introduced some more data oriented services to the firm to help
Mhm.
you compete on the volume front. But
Mhm.
I imagine that a lot of the reason people come back to you is because you're good at the more subjective side. So maybe talk a little
Yeah.
bit about that balance and how you see that shifting over the next couple of years.
Yeah, it's interesting. Have gotten the question, and I think our sector in general is talking a lot about how is AI going to affect headhunting firms. Honestly, one of the trends I've heard other firm leaders talk about is that AI almost makes it more important because now we have a rise of AI generated resumes, tech applying for people. I mean, it's obscene the number of applicants that these poor HR people are getting. So yeah, in some ways it makes our job even more critical. For a hiring manager to come to us and say, look, this is the exact problem I need this person to be able to solve. These are the skills. This is the experience. This is what has worked for us. This is what has not worked for us, right? I mean, we spend a lot of time getting to know our clients. I mean, we have clients that we've worked with for a decade as well, right? So then we really know the company. But for each role, we spend a lot of time understanding what exactly are you looking for. And then we're partnering throughout the search process. So if we get it wrong, or if they, pick up on something later that is actually more important and we didn't factor in, we're evolving the whole thing as we go. Absolutely. I mean, I think it's becoming more essential because of that sheer volume problem.
Well, and like, how does your everyday start to change? I like, and it is also interesting because you're not necessarily the, like, I think you do C-suite searches, but like your bread and butter in that mid-level is like, it's a tricky mix, right? Of like, they are posted roles, but often the hires do come from networks, and it's just sort of this messy process. So like, what is that? Where does that leave you on a day-to-day basis and the type of relationship you have with clients?
Yeah, that's interesting. There are a lot of different ways that we work with clients and can structure search. And certainly when I'm, vetting a new client, potential client, even we'll kind of explore some of that. Sometimes we are going up against other firms. We're totally happy to do that. We're all working the same job. We're going after the exact same pool of candidates in theory, although you'd be surprised how we come up with very different candidates. Yeah, and we're kind of going head to head. I will say we like to say we do win usually. We're very fast, and I think the database approach that we have to our search really helps. I mean, our database is growing daily, but last I checked, it was at 78,000 candidates, and the sheer volume that we do, making us a really big player in this space means that we have the volume of intel. I mean, we interviewed over 2,600 people last year, right? And we take really careful notes and keep really careful track of who that person is, what's their strong suit, who do they sell to, what do they sell, right? What stage company have they worked at, all that sort of information, so that we can find the perfect unicorn for our client very quickly. And then it comes down to actually recruiting them, seeing if they're interested, taking them through the rest of that process. But finding them, with that data becomes a little bit easier.
Yeah, and I think that's what is really important about the way that y'all function specifically, in that you're trying to use data for good, right? It's not,
Mhm.
you're collecting information on
Mhm.
candidates so that you can try to pattern match, right? In a way
Mhm.
that just storming through a pile of LinkedIn resumes is not going to be able to do. It's just too hard. There's
Mhm.
too many, right? So I think
Mhm.
that is, I just want to be like super explicit calling that out, of like
Mhm.
having proprietary data to go alongside public data sets, I think
Mhm.
is really, really important for any services firm, right? Like we at Whiteboard are trying to do the same
Absolutely.
thing. And like being able to leverage that effectively is not, it's not like a skill I would expect any type of services firm to be that good at, right? Because it's
Mhm.
like leveraging databases is not traditionally a service. So I
Yeah.
just like, I think that's so important. And that's, part of why I wanted to
Right.
chat today is you very directly, very explicitly are finding ways to put that data to work. And
Mhm.
that's the report that y'all put out, I guess,
Mhm.
maybe a month or two ago now,
Yeah.
about some of the insights that you're gleaning from
Mhm.
the candidates that you're interviewing. So maybe if you could just lay out like what is the report specifically, and then we can
Mhm.
dig in on some of the interesting things that you found from it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yes, one of the most frequently asked for pieces of data from a hiring manager is, what is this going to cost me? Or, what's the going
Classic.
rate? Right? uh, what do I need to
And I'm
pay this
sure,
candidate?
yeah, I'm sure it's always a little bit more than they'd like to pay.
Yeah, typically, yeah, it's always interesting to see kind of where they think they're going to land.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah, so, through any search that we launch, right, this is an important part of the conversation. It's an important way that we filter. We don't want to approach a candidate with a job that's either way too low or too high. I know there's no such thing as like too high of a salary, but too high of a level, right?
Yeah.
Salary and level are correlated, of course. So we really, the data that we have on salary is something that we anecdotally and formally integrate into every single search and every relationship that we have with hiring managers. But until now, we have never packaged it in a way that can be useful for the entire sector as a whole. And so that, I joined the firm in 2021 to do marketing and very quickly realized that what we wanted to accomplish with marketing wasn't really going to happen until we had better internal data. And so 3, 4 months in, I was soliciting, different ATS systems for their services and assessing different ATS systems. And we transitioned to an ATS system, and I re-architected this database, which brought in our decade plus of information, but also built it out in such a way that we could capture way more nuances. So fast forward, 2024 was the first year that we kind of had the capacity, and I felt like, okay, now's the time. Like let's do this for real. And so yeah, we pulled all the different, we call them qualifying calls that we had throughout 2024, and analyzed the target salaries. Yeah, package it up for everybody else.
And like, what were some of the big takeaways of being able to look at an industry-wide
Yeah.
view of salary data?
Yeah. It's funny. People have asked me kind of, was there anything surprising? And I'm like, well, not to me. I live in this data every day, right? So not necessarily surprising, but I think that, yes, I think for the industry as a whole, it's good to see what those expectations are. And I want to call out specifically that is what's different about this salary report compared to maybe salary surveys, right? So this is a report on our proprietary data on the over 2,600 candidates that we interviewed last year. And the way that so in some states, it's actually illegal for us to ask, what is your current salary? So the way that we're all trained to qualify a candidate is actually gets a much more important number, which is, what is your target base salary? What are you looking to make? What would compel you to take a new role? In particular,
Sure.
because we're often talking to people who are currently employed, right? But they're looking for that next step in their career. We need to know, like, we don't really even care about their current salary, right? Like, we want to know, what is it going to take to hire you? And so because we pose that question differently, the data speaks to, are you paying your employees competitively, right? How easy is it going to be for them to get a job that's paying way more than your current role? Or how much is this position I want to add to my team going to cost? Some of the key takeaways from that were account executives, for example, their target salary base is actually fairly narrow, which that follows with our experience as well. It's just kind of, there's this range. This is what
Because
account
it tends to
executives are paid.
be a more a more incentive comp based function, or like, why
Yes.
is that?
Yes. So comp plans range far more than base salaries. And that is a
Sure.
very interesting point. But also, I just think it is such a well established role. The titles are not well established,
Ah,
titles can be all
okay.
over the place. But when
Yeah.
we
But
talk to
like the
somebody, we're
function.
establishing, yes, okay.
Yeah.
And really, in sales, it comes down to two things. It's either you're a hunter or a farmer. I don't know if you've ever heard
Sure.
those terms,
Yeah.
but
Yeah. Yeah.
it's, you go get the new business, or you're doing renewals or upsell, cross sell, stuff like that. So with those two functions in mind, that's how we segment our conversations that we're having. So that's how we segmented the data. Most typically, those titles are account executive and account manager. But I went into great detail in the salary report as far as outlining the sales org and the various actually titles that we see that are related to different functions, right? So we really tried to capture the entire sales org. So, that data, that I think, because they are such well-established roles, there is a fairly narrow band. I saw, one surprising thing actually is that we saw less variation between K-12 and higher ed than we usually think that there
Hmm.
is. Um, Anecdotally, we tend to find that higher education candidates are asking for slightly more than K-12 focused candidates. I think that that comes down to a few different factors because it was interesting when we did the statistical analysis, they weren't that far off as far as the medians. But, I think where we saw the biggest spread was in those higher level roles, right? VP,
Yeah.
C-suite. And that also makes sense because we're talking to people at a range of different stage companies. So part of that is entitling, right? A VP can mean two completely different things at different size organizations,
Right.
right? And same with the C-suite. Right. I would say because we work with a lot of startups, some of our C-suite numbers I think are a little low, probably compared to, if we had
A
talked to
Pearson
done,
or,
yeah, done like a
whatever.
survey, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's helpful information, and it's real. These are emotional conversations, right? And that's one of the things that we do well, honestly, is establishing enough trust with the candidate really quickly that we can talk through these things, like people's salary makes a huge impact on their lives. And so, we really we cultivate that relationship and so that we can really ask those questions and really help somebody think about what's their next step going to look like.
Yeah. I mean, I think like for me, it's interesting. Like it's one of relatively few remaining double-sided markets that is
Hmm.
pretty opaque. Like, because there's such a stigma against talking about salary, right? And
Hmm.
so it's funny,
Yeah.
like, my wife and I are thinking about buying a house, right? And like the
Hmm.
housing market is so transparent at this point. Like,
Exactly.
yeah, you can like get a deal on a house, but like
Hmm.
rarely is the house like significantly overpriced or underpriced, right?
Yeah.
It's
Hmm.
just rare at this point because of Zillow and Redfin and the MLS, et cetera. There's a certain irony in that higher education is like very opaque compared to housing.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
salaries, I think, are not too far behind. That your point about like there can be two VPs at the same company who make, hundreds of thousands of dollars different salaries.
Hmm. Yeah.
And so that was sort of what struck me about the report is it's a step towards a little bit more transparency in the market of like,
Hmm.
applicant expectations against employer reality. And
Hmm.
it's not necessarily that
Yeah.
one is right and one is wrong, but it's just trying to understand that delta and,
Hmm.
people can make more conscious decisions based on that.
Yeah. I think it also gives hiring managers a chance to think about how difficult their search is going to be, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
You can find candidates at any salary level. Are they going to be what you want? Well, okay, that's one question, right? But also, like, what if there's only two,
Right.
Like, what if there's
Right.
only
Well,
five, but
and how
three
much
of them
time do you
just took a
have?
new job? Exactly, exactly. I mean, the investment in trying to find that one person that's going to be a perfect fit. The other thing, too, with low salaries is you always run the risk of finding that perfect person, right? They're amazing. And then
And then
they
they jump.
realize how much money they could be making somewhere else. And yeah, they're easily recruited away. Providing salaries that are competitive is super important.
Yeah, I think that's a really important just like heuristic for life of like, you can have it, cheap if fast and bad or slow, expensive and,
Exactly.
you
You
know,
can only have two of the.
yeah. And I think that is like a really, and it sounds like you do this with your clients of like,
Mhm.
look, we can't make the decision for you, but we can tell you what your life is going to look like during the search process
100%. Yeah.
based on the types of decisions that you make here at the start.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And we can quickly tell candidate pool size by other things as well. I mean, when a client comes to us and has a super specific geography, I mean, we can tell them right off the bat, like, this is going to be more challenging. We've had clients who are like, we want to be in person. That is also extremely challenging right now. I just did a post on LinkedIn recently about high travel and like, is that a reality? And it really is. It is a reality that is back. Road warriors are back, not as extensively as they were before COVID, but they absolutely are. So, the ability to find a candidate who's willing to be on an airplane 3 days out of the week is tough.
Yeah, yeah, and I again, I think it really comes down to trade-offs and like, what
Always.
trade-offs are you looking for in the job? Well, Jess, thank you.
Thank you.
I think
I
this
love talking
was
about this.
super fun. Yeah, and look, very earnestly, like the report was super interesting to me because it really makes explicit those trade-offs, right? And it's like,
Yeah.
you can
Mhm.
set your salary as an employer below what an applicant wants, and like
Mhm.
that's your call. You're welcome to
Mhm.
do it. And you probably can find somebody,
Mhm.
but they may not have the skills you want, or it may not happen on the timeline that you're thinking of. So,
Yeah. Yeah. The
as
amount
a
of times that
first.
we're brought into a search after a search fails or after somebody stays for 3 months is, that's really common. Of course, it's a good time to engage a recruiter if you're like, oh, okay, we do need help. But, also if you want to, if speed is important and, you don't want to lose runway or time or, market share, it's important to think ahead and, honestly, we're cheaper than making a mistake.
Yeah, and again, like this is the first kind of report like this that I've seen. So I think it's really important to highlight for that reason. So
Absolutely.
thank you.
Yeah.
I'm
Thank you.
grateful, and hopefully a
Good.
bunch of readers are too.
Yeah, absolutely. Appreciate it. Thanks.